There are fortunes that rise on paper and fortunes that sink in steel. On November 5th, 1991, a man vanished from the deck of his own superyacht in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. His body was found floating 20 miles from shore. No witnesses, no struggle. Apparently no explanation. His name was Robert Maxwell, and he was one of the wealthiest men in Britain. Media baron, publisher. A survivor of the Holocaust who had built an empire from nothing. But within 48 hours of his death, investigators discovered he had stolen £440 million from his own employees' pension funds. The empire was a fraud. The wealth was an illusion. And the yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, became evidence in one of the largest financial scandals of the 20th century. But this is not just a story about his death. This is also a story about the machine he left behind. A vessel that cost $20 million to build and $5 million every year just to keep floating. A kingdom of steel that demanded feeding whether it moved or not. What really happened to Robert Maxwell? There are some possible answers. Join me as we go below deck into the dark fate of the billionaire aboard Lady Ghislaine. Robert Maxwell was born Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hoch in 1923 in a village so small that most maps did not bother printing its name. Slatinské Doly, in what was then Czechoslovakia, a place where poverty was not a condition, but a climate. He survived the Holocaust. His parents did not. His siblings did not. By the time he arrived in Britain, he had already buried more than most men witness in a lifetime, and he carried with him a hunger that would never be satisfied. Not by food, not by safety, not by wealth. He reinvented himself, changed his name, joined the British Army, fought in the war, earned a military cross for bravery. But bravery does not build empires. Ambition does. And Maxwell had ambition the way other men have blood. He entered the publishing business in the 1950s, acquiring small scientific journals, then larger ones, then entire imprints. By the 1960s, he controlled Pergamon Press, a significant academic publisher. He understood something fundamental about information. It could be bought, repackaged, and sold again at a markup. The content did not matter. The distribution did. By the 1980s, Maxwell had expanded into newspapers. The Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, the People. He purchased the New York Daily News in 1991, a crumbling American tabloid that lost money every month but carried the illusion of influence. He was not a careful man. He was a gambler. He borrowed against one acquisition to fund the next. He used pension funds, his own employees' retirement savings, as collateral for loans. He moved money between subsidiaries like a magician palming cards, always one step ahead of the creditors, always confident the next deal would cover the last. And it worked. For decades, it worked. He became one of the wealthiest men in Britain. He dined with prime ministers. He owned football clubs. He threw parties on his estates. He was loud, abrasive, brilliant, terrifying. His staff feared him. His children both adored and resented him. His wife endured him. And in 1986, at the height of his power, he decided he needed a yacht. Not a yacht for leisure, not a toy. A statement, a floating headquarters, a kingdom that could sail. The decision to commission a superyacht is not made lightly, though it is often made quickly. Maxwell did not want a production model. He did not want something that could be rented by sheikhs or Silicon Valley founders. He wanted something singular, custom, his. The initial conversations began in Monaco, as these things often do. Naval architects were summoned, designers were interviewed. Specifications were drawn up on napkins, then refined in studios, then formalized in contracts that ran to hundreds of pages. The vessel would be 180 feet long. It would accommodate 12 guests and a rotating crew of 21. It would feature a master suite with a private office, a formal dining room, a cinema, a gymnasium, and a helipad. But more importantly, it would be capable of crossing oceans. this was not a Mediterranean toy. This was a true blue water cruiser, capable of sustained speeds over 20 knots, with fuel capacity measured in thousands of gallons and range measured in thousands of nautical miles. The architects presented their findings in a leather-bound feasibility study. The document was thorough. It outlined every system, every cost, every dependency. Fuel consumption at cruising speed, approximately 200 gallons per hour. Crew salaries, roughly $1. $2 million per year, assuming full staffing with experienced officers. Maintenance and refit, estimated at 10% of the vessel's total value annually. Insurance, fluctuating based on usage, flag state, and crew qualifications, but conservatively projected at $400,000 per year. Dockage fees, variable, but prime berths in Monaco or Antibes could exceed $500,000 annually. The architects did not editorialize. They simply presented the numbers. The vessel would cost approximately $20 million to build. It would cost $3 million to $5 million per year to operate, assuming moderate use. Maxwell read the report. He signed the contract anyway. The shipyard selected for the build was Amels, a Dutch yard with a reputation for precision and discretion. The Dutch do not build yachts the way the Italians do. There is less flourish, less opera, but there is also less compromise. The project was assigned a hull number, not a name, not yet, and the keel was laid in the spring of 1986. This is the moment when dreams meet steel. A keel is not decorative. It is the spine of the vessel, the structural foundation upon which everything else is built. It must be perfectly straight, perfectly level, and perfectly aligned with the center line of the ship. Any deviation, even a fraction of a degree, will propagate through the entire build, creating imbalances that cannot be corrected later. The keel for hull 433, as it was known internally, weighed 40 tons. It was cast in sections, transported to the yard on flatbed trucks, and welded together in the fabrication hall before being lowered into the dry dock. The welding alone took 3 weeks. This is not fast work. This is not careless work. This is the kind of work that requires men to sleep in trailers beside the dock, to eat sandwiches at midnight, to return to the same seam over and over until the X-ray inspection confirms there are no voids, no inclusions, no weaknesses. But even before the keel was fully assembled, there were complications. Maxwell wanted modifications. He wanted the master suite enlarged. He wanted the helipad reinforced to accommodate a larger helicopter. He wanted additional fuel tanks installed to extend the range by 500 nautical miles. Each request was technically feasible, but each request had consequences. Enlarging the master suite meant recalculating the weight distribution. The naval architects had designed the vessel with a specific center of gravity in mind. Moving weight aft or forward, even by a few tons, would affect stability. Reinforcing the helipad meant adding steel. Steel adds weight. Weight requires more buoyancy, which means more displacement, which means more fuel consumption, which means larger fuel tanks, which means more weight. It is a loop. Every modification pulls at the next. The yard's chief engineer raised concerns. Not objections, concerns. He presented revised stability curves. He showed what would happen if the vessel took on water in certain compartments. He demonstrated the potential for listing if ballast were not carefully managed. Maxwell was not interested in curves. He was interested in results. The modifications were approved. The budget, quietly, began to climb. By late 1986, the hull had taken shape. Frame by frame, plate by plate, the skeleton of the yacht emerged from the dry dock like a fossil being reassembled. Steel is patient. Steel does not care about deadlines. It cares about welds, about tolerances, about the integrity of joints that will spend decades flexing in salt water. The yard worked in shifts. Day crew, night crew, weekend crew. The project consumed resources the way a fire consumes oxygen, continuously, relentlessly. Custom components were fabricated off-site and shipped in. The engines were built by MTU, a German manufacturer known for producing power plants for naval vessels and rescue craft. Each engine weighed 8 tons. 2 were ordered, along with 3 generators for auxiliary power. The engines alone cost $1.2 million. They arrived in wooden crates wrapped in cosmoline, a waxy preservative that had to be painstakingly removed before installation. The removal took a week. The installation took 3. Once the engines were mounted, they had to be aligned with the propeller shafts. This is precision work. The tolerance is measured in thousandths of an inch. If the alignment is off, the entire drivetrain will vibrate. Vibration leads to wear. Wear leads to failure. The alignment took 2 weeks. And then there were the generators. The yacht required continuous electrical power, even when the main engines were off. Lighting, refrigeration, air conditioning, navigation systems, communications equipment, all of it demanded electricity. The generators ran on diesel. They were housed in a soundproofed compartment deep in the hull, below the waterline, where their noise would not disturb the guests. But noise is energy, and energy when trapped becomes heat. The generator room required dedicated cooling systems, fans, ducts, heat exchangers, all of which required their own electrical supply. It is a machine within a machine within a machine, and every machine has an appetite. The original launch date was set for May 1987. By March, it was clear this would not happen. The shipyard issued a revised schedule. June, then July, then August. Delay clauses in the contract were triggered. Penalties were calculated. But penalties are a cost, and costs can be absorbed if the project is important enough. Maxwell did not cancel. He accelerated. He authorized overtime. He brought in additional subcontractors. He approved premium rates for expedited materials. The yard's workforce swelled from 60 to 110. Men worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Welders worked through the night, their torches casting shadows across the hull like lightning trapped in slow motion. And still, the schedule slipped. Because you cannot compress time when working with steel. You can add labor, but you cannot add speed without adding risk. And risk, in a vessel designed to carry human beings across open ocean, is not acceptable. The launch finally occurred on September 12, 1987, 4 months behind schedule. The yacht was rolled out of the fabrication hall on a cradle, towed to the slipway, and lowered into the water for the first time. This is a sacred moment in shipbuilding, the moment when theory meets reality, when the calculations are tested by physics. The vessel settled into the water. Ballast tanks were flooded, adjusted, drained, and reflooded. The yacht listed slightly to starboard. More ballast was added to the port side. The list corrected. But during the first sea trial, a short voyage in calm water, with only the crew aboard, the engineers noted something. Vibration. Not catastrophic, not dangerous, but present. It came from the drivetrain. A resonance at certain RPMs that the dampening systems did not fully suppress. The chief engineer logged it. He noted the specific engine speeds at which the vibration occurred. He recommended further analysis. Maxwell was not present for the sea trial. He was in London, negotiating the purchase of another company. The vibration was noted, but it was not addressed. And so the Lady Ghislaine entered service, beautiful, powerful, and flawed in ways that only salt and time would reveal. The keel had been laid under protest. The engines hummed with a tremor no one wanted to name. And the clock, as it always does, began to run. The Lady Ghislaine required a crew of 21. Not servants, not staff. A crew. There is a difference. A servant can be dismissed. A crew member holds a certificate, a license issued by a maritime authority that says they are qualified to operate machinery that can kill you if mishandled. The captain held a master mariner's license, unlimited tonnage, unlimited waters. This is not a decoration. This is a qualification that requires years at sea, examinations in navigation, meteorology, collision regulations, and emergency procedures. It requires proving, under observation, that you can bring a vessel into port in a storm, that you can calculate a fix using only a sextant and a chronometer, that you can command men when systems fail. Captain Mike was hired in October 1987, 3 weeks after the yacht's first sea trial. His salary was $120,000 per year, plus benefits, plus a discretionary bonus tied to the owner's satisfaction. Below him, a first officer, a chief engineer, 2 assistant engineers, a bosun, 4 deckhands, a chef, 2 stewardesses, 2 stewards, an electrician, a purser, and a medic. Some were hired on permanent contracts. Others were rotational, working 3 months on, 1 month off. Their schedules staggered to ensure the yacht never lacked qualified personnel. The total annual payroll, including benefits and insurance, came to $1.4 million. This was before the yacht left port for its first official voyage, because the machine does not care whether it moves. The machine demands feeding whether it sails or sits. The crew lived aboard, not in cabins like the guests, in berths, narrow bunks in the crew quarters, below the waterline, where the hum of the generators was constant, and the air smelled faintly of diesel and laundry detergent. They worked in shifts. The engineers rotated through the engine room every 6 hours. The deckhands scrubbed, polished, painted, and repaired. The stewardesses cleaned cabins that had not been slept in, prepared meals that were not eaten, and stood ready to serve guests who did not arrive. Because Maxwell was rarely aboard. In the first year of operation, the Lady Ghislaine spent 280 days docked in Antibes. The crew worked every one of those days. They maintained systems. They ran drills. They tested equipment. They repainted railings. They polished brass. They inventoried linens. They updated charts. They scrubbed the teak decks with seawater and stiff brushes, because teak that is not scrubbed becomes slippery, and slippery teak kills people. The crew did not complain. This is the nature of the work. You are paid to be ready, not to be used. But the cost does not pause for readiness. The payroll ran every 2 weeks, whether the yacht moved or not. The engines were MTU 16V396 TE94 diesels. Each engine produced 3,460 horsepower. Together, they could push the Lady Ghislaine to a top speed of 24 knots in calm seas. But top speed is not cruising speed. Cruising speed, the speed at which fuel efficiency and engine longevity are optimized, was 18 knots. At 18 knots, the yacht consumed approximately 210 gallons of diesel per hour. Both engines running, propellers turning, hull slicing through water. 210 gallons per hour. That is 5,040 gallons per day, if cruising continuously. The fuel tanks held 32,000 gallons. This gave the yacht a theoretical range of 3,200 nautical miles at cruising speed, enough to cross the Atlantic, if the weather cooperated, if the load was light, if the engines performed as designed. But theory is not practice. In practice, fuel consumption varied. Sea state mattered. Wind direction mattered. Hull fouling mattered. Even the temperature of the seawater affected engine efficiency. And fuel was only consumed while underway, except it wasn't. Because even when the yacht was docked, the generators ran. 3 Onan generators, each producing 99 kilowatts of electrical power. They ran in rotation, 1 active, 1 on standby, 1 offline for maintenance. They powered the lighting, the refrigeration, the air conditioning, the water makers, the sewage treatment plant, the navigation systems, the communication systems, the security systems, the laundry machines, the galley equipment, the entertainment systems. The generators ran 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Each generator consumed approximately 8 gallons of diesel per hour. That is 192 gallons per day. That is 70,180 gallons per year. Even when the yacht did not move, it drank fuel. At an average price of $2.50 per gallon in the late 1980s, fuel costs for the generators alone exceeded $175,000 per year. and that was just to keep the lights on. The guest cabins were climate-controlled. This is not the same as air-conditioned. Climate control implies precision. The temperature in the master suite was maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of whether the yacht was in the Mediterranean in August or the Caribbean in December. This required compressors, chillers, ducts, sensors, thermostats, fans. It required the generators to run continuously, but climate control was only part of the system. The yacht also featured acoustic dampening. The hull was lined with layers of foam and rubber designed to absorb vibration and deaden sound. The guest cabins were isolated from the crew quarters by structural gaps, empty spaces filled with insulation, so that the noise of the engines, the generators, the pumps, and the crew's work would not disturb the owner's sleep. Silence aboard a superyacht is one of the most expensive features. It is more expensive than marble, more expensive than gold leaf, more expensive than the Bosendorfer grand piano bolted to the floor of the main saloon. Because silence requires energy. It requires systems running in opposition to each other. Cooling systems to counter engine heat, ventilation systems to move air without creating drafts, pumps circulating water through sound-dampening mounts. The chief engineer estimated that 40% of the yacht's electrical load, while docked, was dedicated to environmental control and acoustic management. 40% of the power consumption was spent creating the illusion that the machine was not a machine. And the guests, on the rare occasions they were aboard, never heard a thing. Insurance for a vessel like the Lady Ghislaine is not a simple transaction. It is a negotiation. A contract built on risk assessment, actuarial tables, and the underwriter's confidence that the owner will not do anything catastrophically stupid. The initial premium, when the yacht entered service in 1987, was $380,000 per year. This covered the hull, the machinery, the equipment, third-party liability, crew injury, environmental damage in the event of a fuel spill. But the premium was not fixed. It was recalculated annually based on the yacht's operating history, the crew's qualifications, the maintenance records, and the ports visited. If the crew changed, if experienced officers left and were replaced by less experienced ones, the premium increased. If maintenance was deferred, if required inspections were skipped, if equipment certifications lapsed, the premium increased. If the yacht entered high-risk waters, certain parts of the Red Sea, certain straits in Southeast Asia, the premium increased. And if the owner used the yacht for anything other than private pleasure, if it was chartered, if it was used for commercial purposes, if it hosted events that involved non-crew personnel operating equipment, the policy could be voided entirely. The insurance contract ran to 47 pages. It specified that the yacht must undergo a full survey every 5 years, that the engines must be serviced according to the manufacturer's schedule, that the life rafts must be inspected and repacked annually, that the crew must complete safety drills monthly, with logs submitted to the insurer as proof. The contract also specified that certain behaviors would result in immediate cancellation: operating the yacht while intoxicated, failing to report an accident within 24 hours, allowing unqualified personnel to operate the helm or the engines. The penalties for non-compliance were not fines. They were the loss of coverage. And a superyacht without insurance is a superyacht that cannot leave port. In 1989, the premium was raised to $420,000. The reason given: increased operational hours and a minor grounding incident in Sardinia that damaged the starboard propeller. Maxwell paid, but his cash flow by then was tightening. The yacht was not just a vessel. It was a fortress. Maxwell was a man who made enemies easily. Business rivals, journalists, former employees, governments. He had been accused of espionage, of arms dealing, of fraud. Some of the accusations were true, some were not, but all of them made him cautious. The Lady Ghislaine was designed with security in mind. Access to the yacht was controlled by a single gangway, monitored by cameras and locked when not in use. Guests were escorted at all times. Crew were forbidden from entering certain areas without authorization. The master suite, the office, and the communications room were locked even when the owner was not aboard. The communications room was particularly sensitive. It housed satellite phones, encrypted fax machines, and radio equipment capable of reaching anywhere on the planet. It also housed filing cabinets, physical files, not digital, containing documents that Maxwell did not trust to any office ashore. Only the captain and the purser had keys to the communications room, and they had been instructed never to enter it unless absolutely necessary. Security added cost, not just in equipment, cameras, locks, alarms, but in personnel. 2 crew members were tasked with security duties. They were not bodyguards in the traditional sense. They were deckhands with additional training. They monitored access. They checked credentials. They ensured that no one photographed the yacht without permission. Their salaries were the same as other deckhands, but their responsibilities added complexity to the staffing schedule. And complexity in maritime operations always adds cost. By 1990, the yacht's operating procedures included protocols for handling VIP guests, procedures for securing documents, and contingency plans for evacuation in the event of a security threat. None of these procedures were ever tested, but the machine, as always, waited. In May 1990, the yacht's accountant prepared an annual operating summary for Maxwell's review. The document was direct. It listed every expense, every category, every variance from the previous year. Crew salaries, $1,120,000. Fuel, $640,000. Maintenance and repairs, $780,000. Insurance, $420,000. Dockage and port fees, $520,000. Provisions and consumables, $310,000. Communication and navigation systems, $95,000. Miscellaneous, $140,000. Total, $4,125,000. This was the cost of existing. Not the cost of cruising the Mediterranean. Not the cost of hosting dignitaries or flying to the yacht by helicopter or impressing rivals. Just existing. The yacht had traveled 200 nautical miles that year. It had been occupied by the owner for 18 days. The cost per day of occupancy, $245,833. The cost per nautical mile, $3,688. Maxwell reviewed the report in his London office. He read it while on the phone, conducting 2 other conversations simultaneously. He did not ask questions. He did not challenge the numbers. He signed the approval for the following year's budget and returned to negotiating the purchase of a television network. Because the yacht was not to him an expense. It was a marker, a signal, a piece on the board. And men like Maxwell do not ask what things cost. They ask what things are worth. But the distinction, it turns out, matters. Because worth is subjective, cost is not. And the machine, indifferent to worth, to reputation, to the illusions of power, simply continued to consume. The generators hummed. The crew rotated. The brass was polished. The teak was scrubbed. And somewhere, in the yacht's logbooks, an engineer noted that the vibration at cruising speed had worsened slightly. Not enough to ground the vessel. Not enough to halt operations. Just enough to remember. By the spring of 1991, Robert Maxwell's empire was no longer expanding. It was imploding. Quietly at first, then catastrophically. The newspapers he owned were losing money. The Daily Mirror's circulation was falling. The New York Daily News was hemorrhaging cash. $70,000 per day, every day, with no clear path to profitability. His publishing ventures, once profitable, were now servicing debt rather than generating revenue. He had borrowed against future earnings. He had borrowed against assets that were overvalued. He had borrowed against pension funds. His employees' pension funds. Approximately $440 million had been siphoned from the Mirror Group pension scheme and used as collateral for loans that Maxwell could not repay. The money had been moved between subsidiaries, disguised as intercompany loans, hidden in offshore accounts. It was fraud. Sophisticated, deliberate fraud. But it was also desperation. Because Maxwell had built his empire on leverage, and leverage works beautifully when assets appreciate. When they don't, leverage becomes a noose. By mid-1991, his creditors were circling. Banks were demanding repayment. Auditors were asking questions. Journalists, his own journalists, were beginning to investigate. And through all of this, the Lady Ghislaine continued to operate. The crew were paid. The fuel tanks were filled. The insurance premiums were met. Because the yacht was not just a vessel, it was a symbol. And symbols cannot be seen to fail. But in June 1991, the crew noticed something. Their salaries arrived 3 days late. Not an oversight, not a clerical error, a delay. The captain called the yacht's management company. The management company called Maxwell's office. Maxwell's office issued a terse statement. Temporary cash flow issue. Resolved, will not happen again. It happened again in July. This time, the delay was 5 days. Maritime labor contracts are specific about payment schedules. Crew members work under agreements governed by the flag state, the country under which the yacht is registered. The Lady Ghislaine was registered in the United Kingdom, which meant the crew contracts were subject to British maritime law. Under those contracts, if salaries are not paid within 7 days of the agreed date, crew members have the legal right to cease work and, in some cases, to leave the vessel entirely. The chief engineer, a pragmatic Scotsman named Harris, who had been with the yacht since commissioning, convened a meeting with the senior crew. They discussed options. They reviewed their contracts. They debated whether the delays were a sign of temporary difficulty or systemic collapse. Harris did not want to overreact. He had worked for wealthy owners before. He understood that liquidity issues were sometimes just timing problems, that cash moved slowly between accounts, that large organizations often paid late, not out of malice, but out of bureaucracy. But he also understood that a yacht is not a corporate office. A yacht is a machine that requires constant attention. If the crew walks, the machine dies. He sent a formal letter to the management company, noting the delays and requesting assurance that future payments would be made on time. The response was immediate and cold. Payments would be made as funds became available. In August, 2 crew members resigned, one of the assistant engineers and one of the deckhands. Both had offers from other yachts. Both had been quietly looking for months, sensing instability. They were replaced within 2 weeks. But the replacements were less experienced. The assistant engineer had only 3 years at sea, compared to the previous one's 12. Experience in maritime operations is not a luxury. It is the difference between identifying a problem early and discovering it too late. In September 1991, a scheduled maintenance inspection was postponed. The inspection was not optional. It was required by the Classification Society, the independent organization that certifies a yacht's seaworthiness. Every 5 years, a vessel undergoes a full survey. But between those surveys, there are intermediate inspections, annual checks of critical systems. The September inspection was intermediate. It covered the engines, the generators, the steering system, the fire suppression equipment, and the hull integrity. The cost, $45,000. The inspection was postponed due to scheduling conflicts. This is a phrase that means nothing and everything. The captain protested. He explained, in writing, that postponing the inspection could result in the Classification Society issuing a deficiency notice, which could, in turn, affect the yacht's insurance coverage. The response from Maxwell's office was brief. The inspection would be rescheduled when funds permitted. The Classification Society was not informed of the delay. This was a violation of the yacht's operating certificate. Not a major one. Not grounds for immediate detention, but a violation nonetheless. And violations accumulate. Harris, the chief engineer, began keeping his own log. Not the official engine room log, which was part of the yacht's legal record. A personal log. A record of deferred maintenance. of systems that were operating outside their recommended service intervals, of inspections that were skipped. He did this not out of disloyalty. He did it because he understood that when owners fail, crew are blamed, and he had no intention of being blamed for decisions he did not make. By October, the list of deferred items included engine oil analysis, overdue by 200 operating hours, generator synchronization test, overdue by 90 days, fire suppression system pressure test, overdue by 45 days, bilge pump overhaul, overdue by 120 days, hull ultrasonic thickness survey, postponed indefinitely. None of these items were immediately critical. The engines ran, the generators functioned, the fire suppression system would likely work if called upon. Likely. But maritime safety is not built on likelihood. It is built on certainty, and certainty requires money. Harris estimated that addressing all deferred maintenance would cost approximately $120,000. The funds were not allocated. On October 31st, 1991, the Lady Ghislaine departed Gibraltar. Maxwell was aboard. He had flown in from London earlier that day, accompanied by his son Kevin and a small group of advisors. The yacht's destination was Madeira, then the Canary Islands. A short cruise, a working voyage. Maxwell intended to use the time to finalize negotiations for the sale of one of his companies, a sale that might, if successful, provide enough liquidity to hold off the creditors for another few months. The weather forecast was favorable. Light winds, calm seas, visibility good. The crew prepared the yacht for departure. The engines were started. The mooring lines were released. The captain guided the vessel out of the harbor and into the open Atlantic. Maxwell spent most of the first evening in the master suite, on the phone. His voice could be heard through the walls, even with the acoustic dampening. Loud, insistent, angry. He did not join the others for dinner. The yacht continued south through the night, maintaining 16 knots, engines running smoothly. At approximately 4:45 a.m. on November 5th, 1991, a member of the crew noticed that Maxwell was not in his cabin. The door was open. The bed was empty. His reading glasses were on the nightstand. The captain was notified immediately. A search of the yacht was conducted. Every compartment, every deck, every space large enough for a man to occupy. Maxwell was not aboard. At 5:10 a.m., the captain activated the man overboard protocol. The yacht came about. The crew deployed searchlights. The route was retraced. Radio calls were made to nearby vessels and to the Spanish Coast Guard. The sea was dark. The water temperature was 64 degrees Fahrenheit, survivable for perhaps 6 hours if the person was uninjured, if they remained calm, if they were found. The search continued for 3 hours. Nothing. At 8 a.m., the Spanish Coast Guard dispatched a helicopter and 2 patrol boats. They searched for another 6 hours. At 2:15 p.m., a Spanish Air Force crew spotted a body floating approximately 20 miles southwest of Gran Canaria. It was recovered by a fishing vessel. The body was identified as Robert Maxwell. The cause of death was listed as drowning. No signs of trauma. No evidence of foul play. The official conclusion: accidental death, likely the result of a heart attack or loss of balance while on deck. But conclusions, in cases like this, are more about closure than certainty. Because Maxwell was alone when he went overboard. No witnesses. No cameras on the aft deck. No definitive explanation. Some said it was suicide. A man facing financial ruin, criminal investigation, public disgrace, choosing the sea over prison. Some said it was an accident. A man in poor health, exhausted, disoriented in the dark, losing his footing on a wet deck. Some said it was murder. A man with too many enemies, too many secrets, too much knowledge of things powerful people wanted buried. The truth is unknowable, but the yacht survived. The machine, indifferent to the man who commissioned it, continued to float. Within 48 hours of Maxwell's death, the magnitude of his financial crimes began to emerge. Auditors discovered the missing pension funds. Investigators uncovered the web of offshore accounts, the fraudulent loans, the falsified balance sheets. The Mirror Group's stock collapsed. The banks froze Maxwell's assets. Creditors filed claims. Lawsuits were initiated. And the Lady Ghislaine, docked in Tenerife, became evidence. Not in the criminal sense. No one believed the yacht itself was involved in the fraud, but in the practical sense. It was an asset, a very expensive asset, and assets in bankruptcy proceedings are seized. The Spanish authorities placed a lien on the vessel. It could not leave port without clearance. It could not be sold without court approval. The crew were instructed to remain aboard and maintain the yacht pending further notice, but no one specified who would pay them. For 2 weeks, the crew operated in limbo. They performed their duties. They ran the generators. They kept the systems alive. And then, on November 20th, 1991, their salaries did not arrive. Not late, not delayed, simply absent. The captain contacted the management company. The management company had been dissolved. He contacted Maxwell's estate. The estate was insolvent. He contacted the yacht's insurers. The insurers stated that crew salaries were the owner's responsibility, not theirs. On November 25th, the captain convened a meeting with the entire crew. He explained the situation. He explained that they were legally entitled to leave, that they had fulfilled their contracts, that the vessel was no longer their responsibility. But he also explained that if they left, the yacht would deteriorate rapidly, that systems would fail, that the value, whatever remained of it, would collapse. He asked for volunteers to stay on as caretakers at reduced pay until the legal situation resolved. 14 of the 21 crew members agreed, not out of loyalty to Maxwell, out of loyalty to the machine, because sailors, even when betrayed, do not abandon ships. The yacht remained in Tenerife for 8 months. During that time, the caretaker crew maintained minimal operations. The generators ran on a reduced schedule, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, to conserve fuel. Non-essential systems were shut down. The air conditioning was disabled. The entertainment systems were powered off. The yacht was no longer a palace. It was a hulk. But it was a living hulk. The crew repaired what they could with limited resources. They patched leaks. They monitored corrosion. They kept the engines from seizing by running them periodically, even though the yacht went nowhere. They were paid sporadically, from a fund established by the court to cover essential maintenance costs. The payments were a fraction of their original salaries. But they stayed. Harris, the chief engineer, remained aboard for 6 of those 8 months. He kept his personal log. He documented every system failure, every deferred repair. Every day the generators ran out of fuel because the resupply had been delayed. In March 1992, he noted that the vibration in the port engine had worsened. The dampening mounts, which had been flagged for replacement during the cancelled September inspection, were failing. There was no money to replace them. Harris wrote in his log, "Port engine operable but suboptimal. Vibration at 1600 RPM now pronounced. Recommend replacement of mounts within 90 days to prevent secondary damage to drivetrain." The recommendation was filed with the court. It was never acted upon. In June 1992, the court authorized the sale of the Lady Ghislaine. The proceeds would be used to pay creditors. The crew would receive severance. The yacht would change hands. But first, it had to be valued. And valuation, in the aftermath of scandal, is not a matter of engineering. It is a matter of reputation. The yacht had been appraised at $22 million in 1990. In 1992, the best offer was $11 million. The hull was sound. The engines were functional. The systems, though neglected, were repairable. But the name was poison. Steel, it turns out, remembers headlines. The Lady Ghislaine was sold in August 1992 for $13.5 million, not to an individual, to a shell company registered in Panama, acting on behalf of a buyer who preferred anonymity. This is common in the superyacht world. Discretion is not a luxury, it is a prerequisite. The sale was handled through a broker in Monaco. The transaction took 6 weeks to finalize. Lawyers reviewed documents. Surveyors inspected the vessel. Banks transferred funds through a chain of intermediaries designed to obscure the ultimate source. When the money cleared, the Spanish lien was lifted. The crew were paid their severance. The yacht was released, but it could not simply sail away. Because a yacht, under maritime law, carries its history in its registry, its name, its flag, its identification number. The new owner did not want that history. Within a month, the yacht was reflagged. From the United Kingdom to the Cayman Islands. A different jurisdiction, different regulations, different reporting requirements. The name was changed, not dramatically, not to erase the past entirely, but to soften it. Lady Ghislaine became Lady G, subtle, deniable, close enough to honor the original, distant enough to avoid association. The interior was refitted, not rebuilt, too expensive, but refreshed. New upholstery in the master suite, new linens, new artwork. The Bösendorfer piano remained, but the sheet music was replaced. The crew was replaced entirely. Not because the caretaker crew were incompetent, but because they knew too much. They had seen the yacht at its worst. They had witnessed the neglect, the delays, the desperation. The new owner wanted staff who saw only the machine as it was now. Polished, functional, anonymous. Harris, the chief engineer, was offered a position with the new crew. He declined. He had spent 6 years aboard the Lady Ghislaine. He had seen it built. He had seen it launched. He had seen it fail. He took a position on a smaller yacht in the Caribbean. Something manageable. Something that did not carry ghosts. Before he left, he handed over his logs. The official ones went to the new captain. The personal ones, the record of deferred maintenance, of skipped inspections, of systems operating beyond their limits, he kept. Not as blackmail, not as leverage, as memory. Because machines do not remember, but men do. By 1993, the yacht had resumed operations under its new identity. It cruised the Mediterranean in summer, the Caribbean in winter. It hosted guests whose names did not appear in tabloids. The crew were professional. The systems, though aging, were maintained according to schedule. The vibration in the port engine was finally addressed. New mounts installed, alignment corrected, dampening restored. The cost, $38,000. It should have been done in 1991. But 1991 was a different era. A different owner. A different set of priorities. The new owner was not a billionaire, not a media mogul, not a man who needed a floating office to conduct clandestine negotiations. The new owner was a company, a holding entity, an investment. The yacht was no longer a symbol. It was an asset, and assets, when managed properly, can be profitable. The yacht was chartered, not constantly, but regularly. Corporate events. Private vacations. Week-long cruises for clients who paid $150,000 to $250,000 per week, depending on the season. The charter income did not cover the operating costs, but it offset them. In 1994, the yacht generated $680,000 in charter revenue. Operating costs were $3.2 million. The shortfall was covered by the holding company, which wrote it off as a business expense. This is how superyachts survive. Not through profitability, but through strategic losses that benefit someone, somewhere, in ways that are rarely transparent. The yacht no longer made headlines. It no longer hosted prime ministers or arms dealers or journalists chasing stories. It simply existed. And existence, for a machine, is enough. In 1998, the yacht underwent its first major refit since commissioning. Not because it was falling apart, but because tastes had changed. Technology had advanced. What had been luxurious in 1987 was merely adequate in 1998. The refit took place in a yard in Genoa. The yacht was hauled out of the water, placed on blocks, and disassembled piece by piece. The hull was inspected. Ultrasonic sensors measured the thickness of the steel, looking for corrosion, for weak points, for areas where salt water had done its work. There were thin spots, not critical, not dangerous, but present. Steel does not rust from the outside only. It rusts from the inside too. In the bilges, where seawater collects. In the ballast tanks, where water is held for weeks at a time. In the voids between compartments, where moisture condenses and has nowhere to go. The thin spots were ground out, patched and painted. The bilges were cleaned and recoated with epoxy. The ballast tanks were drained, inspected, and treated with corrosion inhibitors. The engines were overhauled, pistons replaced, bearings inspected, fuel injectors cleaned, turbochargers rebuilt. The generators were serviced, windings tested, cooling systems flushed, exhaust systems replaced. The interior was updated, not radically, but noticeably. The master suite was reconfigured. The galley equipment was upgraded. The entertainment systems, once cutting edge, were replaced with newer technology. Flat-screen televisions, satellite communication systems, GPS navigation integrated with digital chart plotters. The refit took 8 months. The cost, $4.8 million. When the yacht returned to the water, it looked like a new vessel. But it was not new. It was the same steel, the same engines, the same bones, just dressed differently. Because a yacht, like a man, can be refurbished, but it cannot be remade. The crew who worked the yacht in the late 1990s and early 2000s did not know its history. They knew the name had been changed. They knew the yacht was older. They could tell, from the way the hull flexed in heavy seas, from the way the engine sounded at certain RPMs, that it had been built in a different era, with different standards. But they did not know about Maxwell. They did not know about the fraud, the drowning, the caretaker months in Tenerife. They knew only the machine. And the machine, by then, had its own personality. The port engine ran slightly hotter than the starboard. Always had. Always would. The engineers learned to expect it. They monitored it. They adjusted cooling flow. They logged temperatures. It was not a problem. It was a characteristic. The galley refrigerator made a clicking sound every 47 minutes. Not a malfunction. Just a relay, cycling as designed. But the sound was distinct. The stewardesses learned to ignore it. Guests never heard it. The teak decks had been replaced twice, but the underlying structure, the steel beams that supported the teak, was original. And in certain light, you could see where the beams had been welded during construction. The welds were smooth, professional, invisible to most people. But a trained eye could see them, could trace the seams, could understand the order in which the yacht had been assembled, frame by frame, plate by plate, 20 years earlier. History does not live in names. It lives in welds. In 2007, the yacht was sold again. This time to an individual, a technology entrepreneur, someone who had earned their wealth recently, who wanted a yacht but did not need the baggage of a famous one. The price, $18 million. The yacht had appreciated, not because it had improved, but because the market had changed. Super yachts had become more common, more accepted, more desirable. The new owner kept the name, Lady G. It meant nothing to him. It was just a name. He used the yacht sparingly, 3 weeks per year. He kept a permanent crew. He maintained it meticulously. He followed every recommendation, met every inspection deadline, paid every invoice on time. Under his ownership, the yacht thrived. The engines were overhauled again in 2010. The interior was refreshed in 2012. The navigation systems were upgraded in 2015. By 2016, nearly every component had been replaced at least once. The hull was original. The superstructure was original. But the engines, the generators, the plumbing, the wiring, the furnishings, all had been renewed. This is the ship of Theseus problem, applied to steel and salt water. If every part of a yacht is replaced, is it still the same yacht? Legally, yes. The hull identification number remains. The registry remains. The history remains. But practically, the machine has no memory. It only has function, and function, maintained properly, endures. In 2019, the original crew, the men and women who had worked aboard during Maxwell's era, began to age out of the industry. Some retired. Some moved to shore-based jobs. Some died. Harris, the chief engineer, passed away in 2018. He was 71. He had spent 40 years at sea, on vessels large and small, in waters calm and violent. His personal logs, the records he had kept during the caretaker months, were found among his effects. His family did not know what to do with them. They were technical documents, maintenance records, notes about engines and generators, and vibration dampening. They were donated to a maritime museum in Scotland. Filed in an archive. Available to researchers, though no one has yet requested them, because the story of the Lady Ghislaine, for most people, ended in 1991. The rest is just machinery. But machinery has its own story. It is a story told in hours, in gallons, in welds and rust and paint. It is a story that does not care about headlines, about scandals, about the men who drown. It is a story about systems that must be fed, maintained, and respected, regardless of who owns them. The yacht still sails. As of 2024, it is 37 years old. Old by superyacht standards, but not ancient, not decrepit. It has been refitted 4 times. It has crossed the Atlantic 9 times. It has consumed approximately 2.4 million gallons of fuel. It has been crewed by over 200 people. It has hosted thousands of guests, most of whom never learned its history. The current owner, identity undisclosed as always, uses it 3 months per year. The rest of the time, it is docked in Palma, Majorca, maintained by a skeleton crew. The operating costs, adjusted for inflation, are now approximately $5.8 million per year. The crew are paid well. The maintenance is rigorous. The systems are monitored constantly. The vibration that Harris noted in 1991 has long since been corrected. The hull has been recoated. The engines have been replaced with newer models, more efficient, quieter, cleaner. But the keel is still the original. 40 tons of steel, laid in 1986 under protest, welded in the dead of night by men who doubted the design. The keel has never been replaced. It cannot be replaced. To replace a keel is to build a new ship. And so the keel endures. Silent, patient, indifferent. It does not remember the man who commissioned it. It does not remember the drowning, the fraud, the scandal. It remembers only the forces it was designed to resist. The weight of the vessel, the pressure of the water, the pull of the sea. There is a ledger that has never been closed. It does not exist in any office. It is not filed with any court. It is not recorded in any archive. It is a ledger of hours, of fuel burned, of salaries paid, of systems maintained. It tallies every dollar spent to keep the machine alive, from the day the keel was laid to the present moment. Construction, $20 million. Operating costs, 1980 to 2024, $187 million. Refits and major repairs, $31 million. Total, $238 million. This is the cost of a dream that became a machine that outlived its dreamer, that survived scandal, neglect, and time. A machine that does not care about legacy, about justice, about the men who built it or the men who betrayed it. It cares only about fuel, about maintenance, about the crew who rise at dawn to check the bilges, to log the temperatures, to ensure that the generators run smoothly. The sea does not care about your reasons. It does not care about your wealth, your power, your desperation. It cares only whether your hull is sound, whether your engines are running, whether your crew is competent. And if those conditions are met, the sea allows you to float. Not forever. Nothing lasts forever. But for as long as the machine is fed. The Lady Ghislaine, now the Lady G, sits in Palma Harbor tonight. The generators hum. The lights glow softly through the portholes. A single deckhand walks the perimeter, checking lines, ensuring the yacht is secure. He does not know about Maxwell. He does not know about Harris. He does not know about the caretaker months, the deferred maintenance, the vibration that once threatened the drivetrain. He knows only the machine as it is now. And the machine, as always, waits. It waits for the next voyage, the next owner, the next storm. It waits with the patience of steel and the indifference of mathematics. Because this was never a story about a man. It was a story about what happens when men believe they can own the sea. The sea does not care what you name your yacht. It does not care how much you paid for it. It does not care whether you are guilty or innocent, powerful or ruined. It cares only whether you respect the machine. And the machine, cold, precise, unforgiving, remains. The ledger stays open. The generators hum. The steel endures.